Well, it's Groundhog Day. Again. And that must mean that I am Professor Robert E.G. Black. And this is the Groundhog Day Project.
It's like we're stuck. You know, like a needle on a scratch record.
It's one of those infinite time loop situations you might have heard about.
It's a thing where the same day keeps happening.
I wake up every day right here, right in Punxsutawney, and it's always February 2nd.
Time. I promise to explain everything later, but I need you to trust me.
Slow down! What are you, in a damn time loop or something?
Groundhog Day Project blog, day 246, dated 4th April 2014, and a donut. Which I can't read you this whole entry because you'll get confused. There was a period in this, in the blog where I was watching the TV show Daybreak, which really should be its own time loop of the week, but not today. And recapping it moment by moment as I watched it, and a lot of this entry includes stuff from that. So the actual episode here won't be very long, but don't worry, I've got a nice long time loop of the week for you coming up. Like, literally the first sentence of this entry is, the second episode of Daybreak is called What If They Run? The cliffhanger, and just start immediately talking about the episode. Second paragraph of the entry. Benesh 2011 talks about eating, the digestive metaphor, and makes some good points. I've written before about food, even mentioned, but which entry is that? Oh, it's the blood sausage entry. Before there was a link. Say it again. I've written before about food, even mentioned Benesh, though at the time I was still avoiding reading her. And I know these two things don't connect in any obvious way, but it occurs to me that Hopper ate nothing in the first episode. Oh, so coming back to Daybreak in connection to this is all a lot. Very a lot. Just as Phil barely eats anything in Groundhog Day. And I argued before, of course, that Phil doesn't have to eat at all. Doesn't have to sleep. Doesn't have to do a lot of things. I also argued at some point in the blog, I should have found that entry, that no one in Groundhog Day eats anything that is nutritious. Except maybe the old man, but he dies anyway. Phil eats pastries. Phil eats popcorn. Rita toys with her food but doesn't actually eat anything. She may take a bite of she takes a bite of the white chocolate. Or the fudge. Wait, which one is it? No white chocolate, no fudge. No fudge.
This is wonderful.
Sorry, can I try you?
Yuck. At Anderson's. And when Buster attempts to eat what's probably steak, he chokes on it. Can't remember if there's any other people eating in the movie. Obviously, multiple scenes take place at a diner, but we don't really see people eating. Anyway, back to somewhere in the entry. Let me get lost. Next paragraph is about Daybreak, and then Lois and Clark. Which, actually, that's a pretty good time loop thing if I haven't done it. I need to go make a list of what I've done as time loops of the week so far so I can get on with the rest, now that I'm going to do one every week, not just on the minute episodes. Speaking of eating, though, I'm reminded of Siddhartha. Siddhartha explains to Kamaswami, I can think, I can wait, I can fast. These are the things he has learned that he can give. Asked to explain the use of these things, Siddhartha explains, fasting is of great value, sir. If a man has nothing to eat, fasting is the most intelligent thing he can do. If, for instance, Siddhartha had not learned how to fast, he would have had to seek some kind of work today, either with you or elsewhere, for hunger would have driven him. But, as it is, Siddhartha can wait calmly. He is not impatient, he is not in need, he can ward off hunger for a long time and laugh at it. Therefore, fasting is useful, sir. Meanwhile, as I type this, Rita's getting the bullet out of Hopper. I started to read that sentence thinking it was about Groundhog Day and then remembered, oh no, the woman in Daybreak is also named Rita. Back to food, though. You'd think Rita would have... Nope. That's still about this Rita in Daybreak. Hopper, Andrea, Benesh, 2011, points out that many scenes in Groundhog Day are set in a diner or restaurant. Food is related to survival, nourishment, pleasure, and communal ritual. Food in Groundhog Day doesn't really serve toward survival. Even when Phil tries to use food to keep O'Reilly alive, he fails. The nourishment is meaningless. And the only other significant eating we see is Phil gorging on junk. Benesh, of course, likes to reference Phil wanting to eat the groundhog. I've complained about that one before. She has 3 screen craps. Keep that one in. Keep it in. She has 3 screen caps related to eating. Phil mocking how Larry eats. Phil shoving the piece of cake into his mouth, which Bill Murray actually did, by the way, multiple times, I believe, without a spit bucket. And Phil with O'Reilly at the counter at the tip top. Hopper and nope, back to the show. But I'm not done with Benesh for today. Oh, right, because the episode ended, and then I was like, but I'm not done. And now Phil is doing his weather report as I eat a late dinner. Had a couple handfuls of popcorn. Not a lot of nourishment there. Earlier, but no real meal. But I'm not done with Benesh for today just yet. She's got one more bit of silliness before the brief digestive metaphor section is complete. And I write this as Phil talks about blood sausage. Rita claims to like it, but I think she's lying. I have no reason to think she's lying. She's not a contrarian like Phil. She's certainly not going to eat any blood sausage or anything else during the movie. Well, not that we see. If the locals were serving blood sausage at their late night party the night before Groundhog Day, or the early morning, she would have eaten it, I'm sure. Certainly not going to eat any blood sausage or anything else during the movie. We will just barely miss her eating some pie on day 3, and she will play with her food on date night, but no actual consumption. Except for alcohol. Wait, does she take a drink? He does. Yeah, no, I think they both do. Anyway, Benesh tells us, taking in is only one aspect of digestion, and in an earlier image depicted in figure 16, similar to the screen cap below, we see a sly reference allusion to elimination is slyly eluded as Phil Connors walks by a waste receptacle featuring a cartoon Punxsutawney Phil. I would point out before I get on with her stupid observation, oh, no, sorry Julia, that those waste receptacles with Punxsutawney Phil's head, one of those can be seen in Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which I've never figured out why. There doesn't seem to be any crew in common. I wonder if just by chance Wes Craven owned one. Did Wes Craven really like Groundhog Day? I mean, New Nightmare only came out in, 94? That's pretty soon after this, so they could have just auctioned off extra stuff, and he bought it, or a set decorator did. But Wes Craven's New Nightmare is filmed around LA, so it's not like it was some local supply chain in Chicago or Woodstock. But continuing with Benesh, notice the copies sign to the left, an allusion to reproduction and the 2 Phils. Actually, before I share the screen cap, I would like to say that I hope Benesh's dissertation went through at least one more edit before it was finalized and published past the version I've got, because the image she means to reference here is actually her figure 14. 16 is the ice sculptures of the groundhog. This is approximately what is in her figure 14 waste receptacle. And it is a moment from... oh, I describe it. That's day 2. So does Phil. He has just walked past where O'Reilly, the old man, is leaning against the wall on the corner. There is a trash can with the Punxsutawney head to the side. The Phil sign girl, which you haven't heard about in this show yet, but you will, is across the street with her friend. Phil is about to get talked to by Ned. That's day 2, but you can actually see the copy sign better on day 1, though that wouldn't link the copies to the trash can as Benesh is trying to link them. Yeah, this is a frame where you can see both. The copy sign is on the door, going from right to left in the frame. Trash can on the right, mailbox, Phil sign girl, flag in the distance, Phil, 2 people exiting the shop, so you can't really see the old man. And it's the shop, the door says copies, 5 cents each. Then I posted the day 1 version, which doesn't have the trash can in the frame. It's Phil, the old man, and the first of the 2 people coming out of the door. Benesh continues. No, not yet. First, why I called this silliness. It's a copies sign. If this were Ramos's later film Multiplicity, I could see assuming it was placed there on purpose. But this is Groundhog Day, which, yeah, there are two Phils, but it is a stretch to A, suggest this copy sign means something, or B, reference it from the photo of the waste receptacle, just to make the connection between reproduction and elimination. Benesh continues. In this, the digestion metaphor, the two entities do not necessarily become identical, but rather each is mutually influenced and expanded by the other. For example, consider a cow that eats grass, transforming both cow and grass, and the humans who drink the cow's milk. Or, in a very different example, imagine an observer of a symbol who is changed by the observation, and whose relationship with the symbol also changes the symbol by imbuing it with meaning, by, for example, painting it, writing about it, which both Benesh and I are doing, yay us, or speaking about it, which now I'm doing, yay me. Thus, expanding the observer expands the symbol's influence by adding a new personal interpretation to the currently existing collective cultural one. In this way, the digestive metaphor is as expansive as the reproductive metaphor. Or it's just a trash can, one of many, and it's just a copies sign. Maybe Benesh wasn't eating while she was writing this section, and she saw that groundhog and thought it looked delicious. Me, A, I'm a vegetarian, and B, Punxsutawney Phil looks a bit too furry to be immediately appealing to me. Today's reason to repeat a day forever: to eat every day a different thing, to try every food there is, to try and maybe invent some new ones.
Most of life is just junk, right? It's filler. And then there's these moments.
It's a perfect day. You couldn't have planned a day like this.
Well, you can. It just takes an awful lot of work.
When all the randomness turns into something perfect. It's like life's dropping all the bullshit just for a second to show us how amazing it could be all the time if it wanted to.
I don't know. I think maybe we're supposed to become like better people. Though I honestly don't even know how that could be possible.
Whoa, now. Sounds like someone's got a case of the time loop blues.
Ever think about it? We must miss so many of them. All those tiny perfect things are just poof, gone. Lost forever. But not today.
You can make right what once went wrong.
That is a disturbingly inspirational idea, Mark.
I know, but what is this? Some kind of time loop, like a gypsy curse? Is the universe giving us a cosmic test, or am I just going fucking crazy?
Time.
The last revision is what counts, apparently.
What if we found them all? All the perfect things in this one town, in this one day. We could collect them.
Time loop of the week is Dead of Night, 1945. This is a movie directed by, let's see, it actually has multiple directors. Directed by Alberto Cavalcanti, Charles Crichton, Basil Dearden, and Robert Hamer. Written by John Baines, Angus MacPhail, T.E.B. Clarke, based on stories by H.G. Wells, E.F. Benson, John Baines, and Angus MacPhail. It is an anthology, as you can tell from all the names, and the based on. It's like 4 Twilight Zone episodes wrapped into another Twilight Zone episode. And the time loop is the wraparound story. We start with Walter Craig, an architect who's been invited to this house in the country, and when he arrives there, it feels a little familiar, and he feels like he remembers all the people from there, but he doesn't remember details, like he had a dream about this. And the more it unfolds is him saying that he knows things that are going to happen. They start having a conversation about strange things that happen to them, and so we get 4 different stories from them. The cool thing is, the narrative structure is that he's having this dream about coming to this house, and at the end, he wakes up from the dream and gets a phone call to be invited to this house. So this is the dream about being at the house where he's had a dream about being at the house. So it's recursive. But the internal structure is in each of these stories. Let's see. We get people talking about strange things that happen to them. Except a lot of them, the strange things aren't what happened to them. We get a race car driver. Oh no, I guess the race car driver's thing was happening to him. He hears a hearse driver calling to him, saying there's just room for one more inside, and then when he goes to get on the bus driver says, just room for one more inside, sir. Same line as the hearse driver. He doesn't get on the bus crashes. In the crowd at the house in the country. I guess it's an inn, and they're trying to expand, which is why you have the various people that just seem to be there. But also it's a dream, so it doesn't matter why they're there, which is kind of cool. So the whole thing is a dream. In that dream, the race car driver is told a story. Then this teenage girl tells a story about a hide-and-seek game at a birthday party. So we go back to a birthday party, so we're inside her story, and inside her story there's this ghost story at the mansion where she's playing hide-and-seek, and she inadvertently finds a ghost, though doesn't realize it's a ghost, when she's hiding. And then when she tells everyone who she met, they're like, yeah, that's like the kid that was murdered by his sister. This story was based on an actual murder at an actual house. But in the context of the story, it's a girl learning the story after meeting this ghost in a story she's telling inside this other guy's dream, which is recurring.
We live inside a dream.
Third one is a guy telling a story. Wait, is the third one the golf story? Are there 5 stories? There might be 5 stories. Third one is one of the women who's there bought a mirror for her husband. I'm not sure why her husband's not at this party. It's not a party. Why her husband isn't at the cottage with her. It's actually kind of cool that you don't know why any of these people are at the cottage except for the architect. He's been called because they want to expand the place. This woman buys her husband a mirror. So she's telling the story about buying her husband a mirror right before they got married. And when he looks in the mirror, he sees himself in a different room than the one he's in. And he starts to kind of lose his mind about it. And I won't spoil it too much, but it turns out the mirror is reflecting a room where it used to be, where the guy who was there killed his wife and then killed himself. And by the end, her husband almost kills her and then, well, presumably would have killed himself. So again, we're getting a backstory inside the story, inside the dream. Then we get the golf story, which is kind of a comedic story and doesn't quite fit thematically, but structurally it feels like they were trying to give you a little bit of a lighter tale before they get to the really dark one at the end. For 1945. None of these are particularly dark for now. You gotta take them in context of 45. This is before the Twilight Zone. It's before Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Long before Tales from the Dark Side, Tales from the Crypt, Creepshow, whatever else anthology shows have been around. The golf story is about a golfer who, they have a competition over a woman. The loser walks into the pond at the golf course and dies. It's weirdly dark for being comedic. But then he comes back as a ghost to haunt the guy who won and mess with his game and his relationship with the woman. And it's kind of comedic, but it's a story being told by one of the golfers to the guy who's now in the cottage. So he's telling a story that he didn't experience directly. Then we get to the last story where the doctor himself tells a story about this ventriloquist who is in prison for trying to kill another ventriloquist because his dummy was trying to replace him. But the doctor is reading the sort of confession note written by the guy in jail explaining this backstory. And so even then, the doctor is telling a story that he didn't experience directly. All of this inside the dream of the main guy, and that dream is recurring. So it's like stories within stories, and then they're inside of a dream, which is a movie. And it is such a wonderful sort of horror structure. For 1945, it's probably fantastic as far as like scares go and being dark and frightening. By modern standards, it's all fairly tame. But it's kind of brilliant, the way it's put together. And the way it gets down to predictive choices, where the main guy, Craig, has basically said something terrible is going to happen later. And it happens after one of the guys tells him about the death of someone he'd never heard of, and it's the golf story. And the doctor breaks his glasses. And they're like, well, as long as the doctor doesn't break his glasses, it's fine. At one point, he predicts the teenage girl is going to leave soon. And they're like, no, she's here for How can it be an inn? There are some confusing elements because of the element of not knowing why the people are there. It's weird that her mother comes to pick her up when this seems to be an inn at which she is staying, but she's clearly supposed to be a teenager in the 40s, which means she shouldn't be staying in an inn by herself. But they're like, well, we'll make sure she stays and we're all good. And then her mother immediately shows up to pick her up, proving him right. Meanwhile, he's saying something bad is going to happen later. What that something bad is, we don't know. But we know he dreads it. But then by the end, it's kind of a time crimes kind of deal, where it doesn't matter how much he dreads it. He knows it has to happen. And it happening is what wakes him up. And then he gets the phone call. The last shots of the movie are the first shots of the movie. And I loved it. In addition to all of that, this is from The Guardian. This is Dead of Night, the movie that changed the universe. 5th January 2005, by Simon Singh. When critics discuss Robert Hamer's film Dead of Night, they tend to focus on its unusual structure. It consists of a series of shorts, or the fact that it was the first horror film to be made after the repeal of wartime censorship. However, few commentators realize that the film inspired Fred Hoyle, Thomas Gold, and Herman Bondi to develop a new model of the universe. The trio saw the film in 1946, when cosmologists were still struggling to come to terms with observations that showed the universe was expanding. This seemed to imply that the universe started with a Big Bang. Such a universe had a finite history and changed dramatically with time, growing bigger, emptier, and more desolate. But Fred Hoyle hated the notion of a Big Bang. He favored the traditional view of an eternal and unchanging universe. How could he marry eternity and immutability with the observations of expansion and change? Dead of Night showed him that things could change and yet remain the same. Look away now if you don't want to know how the film ends. Oh no, there's going to be spoilers. Dead of Night is the story of a young architect who wakes up after a night of dreaming, then gets dressed and drives to a cottage in the country. To be fair, the movie doesn't show us that he has just woken up after a night of dreaming. It starts with him in the car arriving. The cottage is full of guests he has never met, but he is astonished because he recognizes them from the dream he had the previous night, and he tells them so. The guests are intrigued, and one by one they tell their own weird stories. Once their scary tales are completed, the guests turn on the architect and start to strangle him. Just as he is about to die, he suddenly wakes up from his dream. That is not how it ends. What? No. That is... What? What version of the movie did you see? Okay, that's not a spoiler, because that is inaccurate. That is not what happens. They don't turn on him and strangle him. They all leave the room so he can have a private moment with the doctor, and then he strangles the doctor. How did you get that wrong? Just as he is about to die, he suddenly wakes up from his dream, then gets dressed, and drives to a cottage in the country. In short, the film changes, but ends up the same, and it could continue for eternity. Hoyle wondered if the universe had a similar property. He and his colleagues proposed that the universe expands, but new matter is created in the increasing gaps between galaxies so that the overall density of the universe remains the same. In this way, the universe could expand, but continue forever, largely unchanged. This so-called steady-state model gained a huge following throughout the 1950s, but it was ultimately proved to be wrong when further observations backed the Big Bang. Nevertheless, the flawed model provided many useful ideas about the cosmos and galvanized thinking about the nature of the universe, so Dead of Night certainly contributed to scientific understanding. And I thought that was cool.
Knew you were gonna say that.
This has been a production of Lemming Drops Studio. You can find links to more at lemmingdrops.com or join the Facebook group Lemming Drops Studio Tour. Also, you can support all my shows at patreon.com/lemmingdrops.
What is wrong in the end which never comes? Or which comes again and again, laughing, like waves.
Since the Big Bang set everything in motion, everything that happens in this universe has to be the way it is. Particles unfolding the way they're destined to.
How do you sleep at night? You've never seen Groundhog Day?
Yeah, you know Groundhog Day is not a documentary.
Remember when Groundhog Day was just a movie?